The red light on Dr. Elena Martinez's desk started blinking at 3 in the morning. She rolled over in her small cabin on the research ship Don's Edge and squinted at the urgent message signal. Elena had been studying alien plant samples for 6 months in the quiet sector near the edge of known space. Nothing exciting ever happened out here, which was exactly why she liked it. She pulled on her lab coat and walked to her computer. The message came from the Galactic Council itself, marked with the highest priority seal. Elena's hands shook a little as she opened it. The Council never contacted small research ships unless something was very wrong. The message was short but terrifying. Coordinates to a dead planet called Zarian Prime, along with a warning about something called the Trial of Worthiness. Elena read the file 3 times before she understood what it meant. Over the past 100 years, 12 different alien species had sent their best people to investigate an ancient structure on this world. None of them had ever come back alive. Elena ran through the ship's narrow halls to find Captain Jake Sullivan. She found him in the engine room, lying under a power converter with grease on his face and humming an old Earth song. Jake always seemed happy, even when fixing broken equipment at 3 in the morning. His easy smile made everyone on the crew feel better during long space missions. "Jake, we need to talk," Elena said, waving the message pad. "The Council wants us to go somewhere dangerous." Jake slid out from under the machine and wiped his hands on a dirty towel. His smile got bigger when he saw how worried Elena looked. "Dangerous sounds interesting. What kind of dangerous are we talking about? The fun kind or the everyone dies kind?" Elena showed him the message. Jake read it while scratching his chin, leaving a small grease mark. When he finished, he was still smiling, but his eyes looked more serious. "So let me get this straight. 12 different alien species, some of them way smarter and stronger than humans, all went to this place and died, and now the Council wants us to try. The structure is sending out some kind of signal," Elena explained. "The scientists think it might be technology that could change how we travel between stars, but every team that goes there just vanishes. The only thing they find in the final messages is something about a smiling death." Jake stood up and stretched. "Well, that doesn't sound ominous at all. Who else is on this suicide mission?" Elena pulled up the crew list. Amy Chen from Engineering, Ryan Brooks from Tactical, and Lisa Park from Communications. All volunteers from different ships in the area. "Good people," Jake nodded. Amy once fixed a broken hyperdrive with spare parts and chewing gum. Ryan fought off space pirates with nothing but a wrench and attitude. And Lisa can talk to anyone, even those weird crystal aliens that speak in math. The next morning, Jake called a meeting in the ship's small conference room. The 4 crew members sat around a metal table while Elena explained what they knew about Zarian Prime. The planet had been dead for thousands of years. Nothing but rocks and dust under a dying red sun. But in the middle of the largest continent, stood a massive structure made of some kind of crystal that no one could identify. Amy leaned forward in her chair. She was small but tough, with short black hair and quick hands that could fix anything. "What happened to the other teams? Any details?" Elena pulled up holographic reports from the previous expeditions. The images showed the remains of 12 different camps around the crystal structure. Ships from the proud, bird-like the super-smart Quantum Collective, the warrior clans of Bloodstone and 9 other species, all abandoned, or with signs that the crews had entered the structure willingly. Ryan crossed his muscled arms. He had been a soldier before joining the exploration service, and his scarred face showed he had seen plenty of combat. "So they went in but never came out. Could be a trap, could be some kind of weapon." Lisa pushed her glasses up her nose. She was the youngest of the group, but her brain worked faster than most computers when it came to languages and communication. "The signal pattern is really strange. It's like the structure is calling for someone, but only certain types of people. Maybe it needs living beings to activate whatever is inside." Jake listened to all of this while eating an apple and grinning. When everyone finished talking, he leaned back in his chair. "So we have a mysterious alien structure that kills everyone who goes near it, but might contain the secret to better space travel. The Council thinks we might succeed where 12 other species failed, even though some of those species could fly or had brains like supercomputers." "That's about right," Elena said. "And if we say no, they'll probably just send someone else who might not be as careful as we are." "Probably." Jake finished his apple and tossed the core into the recycler. "Well then, I guess we better go save the galaxy." Set course for Zarian Prime. The journey took 3 days. During that time, Elena studied everything she could find about the dead planet and the species that had failed before them. The more she learned, the more worried she became. These weren't weak or stupid aliens. The Zephyrians could fly through space without ships. The Quantum Collective could solve problems in seconds that would take humans years. The Bloodstone Warriors were so strong they could punch through metal walls. But something on Zerion Prime had killed them all. On the third day, the Dawn's Edge dropped out of hyperspace near the dead world. Through the viewport they could see the crystal structure gleaming like a jewel on the dark surface below. It was bigger than Alina had imagined. Rising from the ground like a mountain made of light, Jake stood at the main window, still smiling, that easy smile that never seemed to leave his face. But Alina noticed his hands were steady and his eyes were alert. Whatever was waiting for them down there, Jake was ready for it. "Well, team," he said, turning to face his crew. "Looks like we're about to find out why everyone else failed. Anyone want to place bets on whether we'll be smarter or just luckier?" The landing shuttle touched down on Zerion Prime with a soft thud. Jake looked out at the barren landscape through the small window and whistled softly. The ground was covered with the wreckage of 12 different expeditions, scattered around the crystal structure like broken toys. Ships from species across the galaxy lay abandoned, their hulls cracked and empty. "Cheerful place," Jake said, checking his equipment one more time. "Really gives you that warm welcome feeling." Alina ran her scanner over the area outside. "No immediate dangers. The atmosphere is breathable, but thin. We'll need oxygen masks for anything more than a short walk." The team moved carefully through the wreckage toward the crystal structure. Amy knelt beside a Zephyrian ship and shook her head. This thing was built to last 1,000 years. Whatever happened here, it was an equipment failure. Ryan examined. Blast marks on a Bloodstone Warrior transport, no signs of fighting, no weapon damage. It's like they just walked away from everything and never came back. Lisa held up a small recording device she had found near a Quantum Collective probe. "I'm picking up partial transmissions from most of these sites. Final messages before the teams entered the structure. They all mention the same thing." "Let me guess," Jake said, adjusting his oxygen mask. "Something about smiling death." "Exactly. But it doesn't make sense in any of their languages. The words don't translate properly, like they were trying to describe something they had never seen before." The crystal structure rose above them like a mountain of light. It was smooth and perfect, with no visible doors or windows. But as the team approached, sections of the crystal began to glow brighter. Jake reached out to touch the surface and jerked his hand back in surprise. "It's warm," he said. "And I think it's scanning us." Suddenly, a section of the crystal wall dissolved away, revealing a doorway that led into soft blue light. Jake peered inside and saw a vast chamber filled with floating platforms connected by bridges that seemed to be made of solid light. "Well, that's not ominous at all," he said, but his smile never wavered. "Anyone else get the feeling we're being invited in?" Alina grabbed his arm. "Jake, we should go back and study this more. Send in probes first. Analyze the energy readings." Alina, 12 different species tried the careful approach. Some of them had technology we can't even understand. "I'm thinking maybe we need to try something different." Amy checked her equipment scanner. "The structure is definitely responding to our biological signatures. It won't activate for machines or robots. It needs living beings." Ryan moved closer to the entrance, his hand resting on his sidearm out of habit. "I don't like this. Every instinct I have is screaming trap." Jake looked at his team and then back at the glowing doorway. "You know what, you're all right to be scared. This place has killed representatives of 12 species. But someone has to go in there, and I'd rather it be us than some other poor team that might not be as ready. We should all go together." Alina said, "No." Jake's voice was firm but still friendly. "If something happens to me, you need to get back to the ship and warn the council. Besides, maybe whatever is in there doesn't like crowds." Before anyone could argue, Jake stepped through the doorway. The crystal sealed behind him immediately, cutting off his team's shouts of protest. Jake found himself standing alone in the vast chamber, surrounded by floating platforms that stretched up into darkness above. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing strangely in the space. "Anyone home?" The walls around him suddenly came alive with holographic images. Jake watched in fascination as recordings played of the previous expeditions. He saw proud Zephyrians with their beautiful feathered wings approaching the floating platforms with confidence. Their natural ability to fly gave them an obvious advantage in navigating the chamber. But as Jake watched, the platforms began to move and shift. The Zephyrians tried to adapt, using their superior speed and aerial skills, but something went wrong. The recordings showed them becoming more and more frustrated, then desperate, then terrified. The final images showed them falling into the darkness below, their faces twisted with despair. The next recording showed the Quantum Collective representatives. These aliens looked like walking computers, with crystal minds that could process information faster than any human brain. They approached the chamber's challenges with perfect logic, calculating optimal solutions to every problem. But again, something went wrong. Jake watched as their logical approaches failed one by one. The more their perfect calculations proved useless, the more confused and desperate they became. These beings had never experienced failure before, and when their greatest strength became worthless, they had nothing left to fall back on. Recording after recording played the same pattern. The warrior clans of Bloodstone tried to smash their way through the challenges with incredible strength. The telepathic mindweavers tried to communicate with the structure directly. The shape-shifting formless tried to adapt their bodies to each new obstacle. Every species approached the trials with confidence in their greatest abilities, and every species failed when those abilities proved insufficient. A voice echoed through the chamber, speaking in perfect English. "Greetings, human. I am the architect of this place. You have seen the fate of those who came before you. Do you understand why they failed?" Jake looked around, trying to find the source of the voice. "Well, I'm guessing it wasn't because they weren't smart enough or strong enough. Some of those species could probably bench press a spaceship, correct? They failed because they defined themselves by their advantages. When those advantages were removed, they had no other foundation to stand upon. Tell me, human, what advantage do you bring to these trials?" Jake thought about this for a moment, then started laughing. "You know what, I don't think I have any special advantages. I can't fly like the Zephyrians or think as fast as the Quantum Collective. I'm not super strong or telepathic or able to change shape. I'm just a guy who fixes spaceships and tries to keep his crew happy. And yet you smile, even knowing that 12 superior species have died in this place. You continue to smile. Why?" Jake shrugged. "Because being scared or angry won't help me figure out what you want. Besides, this is actually pretty interesting. I've never seen anything like this place before." The platforms in the chamber began to move, rearranging themselves into a new pattern. Jake watched with curious interest rather than fear. The architect's voice spoke again, and for the first time, it sounded surprised. "Interesting, indeed. You are not what I expected, human Jake Sullivan. Perhaps you will prove different from the others. Let us begin the trials and see if you're strange. Optimism can succeed where strength and intelligence have failed." Jake looked up at the shifting platforms and grinned even wider. "You know what? This is going to be fun." The first trial began without warning. Jake found himself standing on the bridge of a starship he had never seen before, watching through the main viewport as a massive star grew brighter and brighter. Warning lights flashed red all around him, and computer voices announced in multiple languages that the star was about to explode. "Well, this is quite the pickle, isn't it?" Jake said to the empty bridge, reading the display screens. According to the readings, he had maybe an hour before the star went supernova and destroyed everything in the system, including several inhabited planets with billions of people. Jake moved to the engineering station and started examining the ship's systems. The vessel was incredibly advanced, far beyond anything humans had built. But as he worked, components began failing one by one. The hyperdrive shut down first, then the shields, then the main engines. Within minutes, he was left with nothing but basic life support and a few emergency tools. He pulled up the recordings of previous attempts at this trial. The Zephyrians had tried to outfly the solar radiation using their natural speed and agility. When their abilities proved insufficient against the scale of the disaster, they had become desperate and made increasingly risky attempts to escape. The final recording showed them screaming in frustration as their ship was consumed by stellar fire. The Quantum Collective had approached the problem with mathematical precision, calculating exactly how to redirect the stellar explosion using the ship's advanced technology, but as their tools failed one by one, their perfect equations became useless. The recording showed them frantically recalculating as their logical minds struggled to accept that no solution existed. Jake scratched his head and looked at the failing systems around him. "You know what? Maybe I'm thinking about this wrong. Maybe the point isn't to save the star system with fancy technology." He started whistling an old Earth tune as he gathered up the few working tools he had left. Instead of trying to fix the advanced systems, Jake began improvising with whatever he could find. Spare power cables, emergency oxygen tanks, even the coffee maker from the ship's kitchen. When the improvised solutions didn't work perfectly, Jake didn't panic or despair. He laughed at the absurdity of trying to save a star with duct tape and spare parts. "Well, that didn't work. Let's try something else." Each failure was met with good humor and immediate attempts to find another approach. Jake treated the impossible problem like a puzzle game rather than a life-or-death situation. His cheerful attitude seemed to confuse the trial itself, as if it had been designed to break spirits through hopelessness. After dozens of attempts, Jake finally managed to create a makeshift device that could redirect a tiny fraction of the stellar energy. It wasn't enough to save the system, but it was something. "Hey, it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing," he said with genuine satisfaction. The trial ended suddenly, and Jake found himself back in the crystal chamber. The architect's voice sounded puzzled. "You failed to save the star system, yet you showed no despair. You did not achieve the goal, yet you celebrated small progress. This is most unusual." "Well, I gave it my best shot," Jake replied, still smiling. "Sometimes your best isn't enough to solve the problem, but that doesn't mean you stop trying. Besides, I learned some interesting things about stellar engineering." The second trial began immediately. Jake found himself in a maze that stretched in all directions, with walls that shifted and changed every few minutes. Previous expedition recordings showed teams growing increasingly frustrated as their systematic approaches failed. The logical species had tried to map the maze mathematically, but the walls changed too quickly. The warrior species had tried to smash through the barriers, but they simply reformed. Jake approached the maze differently. Instead of treating it as an obstacle to overcome, he treated it like an adventure to explore. When he hit a dead end, he laughed and tried a different path. When the walls shifted and blocked his route, he shrugged and found another way. "This is actually pretty clever," he said, running his hand along a wall that felt warm to the touch. "It's like the maze is alive. I wonder if it responds to more than just physical movement." Jake began talking to the maze as he walked, complimenting its design and making jokes about getting lost. To his surprise, the walls seemed to respond to his emotional state. When he was genuinely happy and curious, new paths appeared. When he forced himself to be cheerful, the maze closed off routes, so you can tell the difference between real happiness and fake happiness, Jake mused. "That's a neat trick. Most people can't even do that." The maze became less about navigation and more about maintaining genuine joy despite the endless frustration of going in circles. Jake found himself enjoying the challenge for its own sake, celebrating the beauty of the shifting walls and the cleverness of the design. The third trial was the cruelest yet. Jake found himself face to face with holographic copies of his crew members, each one blaming him for their deaths in scenarios that felt completely real. Elena accused him of being reckless and getting everyone killed. Amy blamed him for not listening to her technical warnings. Ryan called him a coward for abandoning his team. Lisa wept as she described how his poor leadership had doomed them all. The accusations were perfectly crafted to target Jake's deepest fears about his own adequacy as a leader. The recordings of previous trials showed how each species had responded to similar psychological attacks. The warrior clans had tried to fight the illusions, the logical species had tried to rationalize them away. All had eventually broken under the emotional pressure. Jake did something different. He sat down on the floor and really listened to each hologram, acknowledging their concerns without becoming defensive. When Elena's image finished listing his failures, Jake nodded thoughtfully. "You know what, Elena, you're probably right that I should have been more careful. I do tend to jump into dangerous situations without thinking them through completely. But beating myself up about it won't bring you back, and it won't help me save you either." He talked to each holographic crew member with the same honest openness, accepting criticism where it was valid while refusing to let guilt consume him. His smile remained genuine throughout, tinged with sadness but not broken by despair. "The thing is," he said to the empty air after the holograms faded, "everyone makes mistakes. The question isn't whether you'll mess up, it's what you do after you mess up. And right now, I'm going to keep trying to find a way to save my real crew." The trial chamber fell silent for a long moment. When the architect spoke again, its voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. "You continue to surprise me, human. 3 trials designed to break the spirit through futility, frustration, and guilt, and yet your essential nature remains unchanged. Most curious indeed." Jake stood up and dusted off his pants. "Thanks. I try to stay positive. Life's too short to spend it being miserable, you know." The fourth trial began with a wall of light that showed Jake everything he did not want to see. Holographic displays surrounded him, each one showing the detailed death of every expedition that had come before. He watched the proud Zeph lose their ability to fly and be forced to crawl through challenges that broke their spirits. He saw the brilliant quantum collective bombarded with logical paradoxes that crashed their computer-like minds. Each species died not from physical harm, but from the psychological trauma of having their core identities stripped away, defined themselves by their grace in flight, so being grounded destroyed their sense of self. The quantum collective existed to solve problems through logic, so unsolvable paradoxes drove them to despair. Jake watched recording after recording of similar breakdowns. The warrior clans of Bloodstone, who measured everything by strength, were weakened until they could barely move. The telepathic mindweavers were isolated from all mental contact. The shape-shifting formless were locked into single forms they found repulsive. "I'm starting to see a pattern here," Jake said, studying the displays with the same curiosity he might show for an interesting machine. You find out what makes each species tick. Then you take that away from them. When they can't be what they think they are, they fall apart. The displays changed to show Jake's own psychological profile, compiled from his actions during the previous trials. Lists of his failures, mistakes, and inadequacies scrolled past in painful detail. Every time he had been wrong, every person he had failed to help, every decision that had led to problems. Then the trial began in earnest. Jake found himself in a simple white room with nothing but a chair and a puzzle box that seemed to have no solution. The puzzle was beautiful in its complexity, made of interlocking pieces that moved in patterns that hurt to think about. Every logical approach he tried led to contradictions. Every intuitive guess made the puzzle reset itself. As he worked, the room filled with recordings of his own voice reading out his failures, his mistakes as a young officer that had cost lives, times when his optimism had blinded him to real dangers, moments when his casual attitude had hurt people who needed him to be serious. The voices grew louder and more insistent, listing every way he had ever fallen short of what others needed him to be. The puzzle remained unsolvable, mocking his attempts to find a solution. The trial was designed to break him by stripping away his two greatest strengths, his problem-solving ability and his positive self-image. Instead of despair, Jake started laughing. Not the bitter laugh of someone breaking down, but genuine amusement at the absurdity of the situation. "You know what?" he said to the empty room. "I've screwed up a lot of things in my life, but I've never let that stop me from trying to do better tomorrow." He pushed the puzzle aside and began examining the room itself, looking for hidden mechanisms or clues. When he found nothing, he started telling jokes to the walls. The recordings of his failures grew louder, but Jake began singing over them, old Earth songs that his grandmother had taught him as a child. "The thing about mistakes," he said conversationally, as if talking to a friend, "is that they're only really bad if you don't learn anything from them. Otherwise they're just expensive. Education." Jake's refusal to be broken by the trial seemed to confuse the room itself. The puzzle began changing its configuration randomly, as if the controlling intelligence wasn't sure how to proceed. The recordings of his failures started skipping and repeating, losing their emotional impact through repetition. "You want to know something funny?" Jake continued, balancing the puzzle box on his head like a hat. "I never thought I was particularly special. Good at my job, sure, but nothing amazing. Turns out, maybe that's exactly what you need sometimes. Someone who doesn't think they're too important to fail." The trial ended abruptly, leaving Jake alone with the silent puzzle box. The architect's voice filled the room, but for the first time, it sounded uncertain. "Your psychological profile indicates that you should have been devastated by this trial. The removal of your perceived competence and the confrontation with your failures should have triggered existential despair. Yet you responded with genuine amusement. How is this possible?" Jake set the puzzle box down carefully and stretched. "I guess it's because I never thought being competent was the most important thing about me. But if I wake up tomorrow and discover I'm terrible at everything, I'll still be me. I'll just be me with a lot more to learn." "But how do you maintain hope when faced with impossible challenges? How do you find joy when confronting your own inadequacy?" Jake considered this seriously for the first time since entering the structure. "You know, I never really thought about it like that. I suppose it's because the challenges themselves are kind of amazing. I mean, look at this place. Someone built trials that can perfectly target the psychological weaknesses of dozens of different species. That's incredible engineering." He gestured around the white room. "And the puzzle box, even though I couldn't solve it, it was beautiful. Someone put a lot of thought into making something that complex and elegant. I can appreciate good work even when it's designed to frustrate me." The architect was quiet for a long moment. "You find beauty in the instruments of your own testing. You appreciate the craftsmanship of your potential destruction. This is not logical behavior." "Logic is overrated," Jake said with a grin. "Logic would have told me not to come in here in the first place. Logic would say that 12 failed expeditions mean humans will fail too. But you know what's more interesting than logic? The fact that something wanted to test us badly enough to build this whole elaborate setup. You view these trials as communication rather than punishment. Well, yeah, I mean, if you just wanted to kill people, you could do it a lot more efficiently than this. All these trials, all this complexity, you're trying to teach us something. Or maybe you're trying to learn something about us. Either way, that's fascinating. Jake stood up and walked to where he thought the door should be. So what's the next lesson? Because I have to admit, I'm getting pretty curious about what all this is building up to. The wall dissolved away, revealing a new passage filled with shifting, multicolored light. As Jake stepped toward it, the architect spoke one more time. You may be the most unusual creature I have encountered in a millennium of testing. Your species defies every model I have constructed for advanced intelligence. Perhaps that is precisely what makes you interesting. Jake paused at the threshold of the new passage. You want some free advice? Maybe the problem isn't with my species. Maybe the problem is with your models. Smart doesn't always look the way you expect it to. With that, he walked into the shifting light, whistling the same old Earth tune he had been humming when Alina first found him fixing the power converter. Behind him, the white room stood empty except for an unsolvable puzzle that no longer seemed quite so important. The fifth trial chamber was the largest yet, with walls that stretched up into darkness and holographic displays floating in the air like windows into other worlds. Jake found himself standing before what looked like a control panel made of pure light with symbols that hurt his eyes to look at directly. Welcome to the final test, human Jake Sullivan. The architect's voice echoed around him. This trial has destroyed more expedition leaders than all the others combined. You must choose between two outcomes, and you have exactly 10 minutes. To decide, the holographic displays came alive, showing Jake to different scenarios. In the first, he saw himself gaining access to the ancient technology hidden within the structure. The knowledge would revolutionize space travel, allowing humanity to explore the entire galaxy in months instead of centuries. Diseases could be cured, energy problems solved, and Earth's growing population could spread to 1,000 new worlds. But the second display showed his crew outside the structure, under attack by automated defense systems that had suddenly activated. Alina was trapped under debris from their landing shuttle. Amy was trying to repair a communication device with sparks flying around her. Ryan was firing his weapon at flying machines that moved too fast to hit. Lisa was unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. Choose wisely, the architect said. You can save your friends by leaving immediately, but the knowledge will be lost forever. Or you can claim the technology that could save billions, but your crew will die. You have 10 minutes. Jake watched the displays showing his team in danger, his usual smile fading for the first time since entering the structure. He could see Amy working frantically to boost their communication signal, probably trying to call for help that wouldn't arrive in time. Ryan was down to his last energy clip, and the flying attackers were getting closer. The recordings of previous expeditions showed how each species had handled similar impossible choices. The logical quantum collective had chosen knowledge over individuals, calculating that saving billions was worth more than saving 4. The warrior clans had chosen honor and loyalty, refusing to abandon their comrades even for the greater good. The telepathic species had tried to find mental solutions. The flying species had tried to rush back and forth between both choices. All of them had treated it as a zero-sum game where one choice had to exclude the other. All of them had failed. Jake stared at the control panel and the floating displays for almost 5 minutes without moving. Then he started laughing again, the sound echoing strangely in the vast chamber. You know what? I think you're asking the wrong question, he said to the architect. Why can't I have both? Who says I have to choose between saving my friends and getting the knowledge? He began examining the control panel more closely, not trying to activate it but studying how it was constructed. The symbols were complex, beyond human understanding, but the underlying principles reminded him of systems he had worked on. Everything had inputs and outputs, power sources and control mechanisms. Let me ask you something, Jake said, tracing patterns in the air above the panel. These automated defenses that are attacking my crew, are they part of the trial, or are they a separate system? The architect was quiet for a moment. The defenses activate when someone spends too long in the final chamber. They are designed to add urgency to your choice, so they're not actually necessary for anything important. They're just there to make me panic and choose quickly. Correct. Jake grinned and started working on the control panel, not trying to claim the technology but attempting to access the defense systems. Then let's turn them off first, shall we? Hard to make a good decision when you're worried about your friends getting killed by unnecessary robot attacks. The architect sounded surprised. That is not how this trial is meant to proceed. You are supposed to choose between the two options, says who. Jake's fingers moved over the light controls with surprising confidence. His years of fixing broken machines had taught him to recognize patterns even in alien technology. Look, I appreciate good game design, but artificial time limits are just annoying. Let me solve the real problem first. To the architect's apparent shock, Jake managed to access the defense grid and shut down the attacking machines. The displays showed his crew looking around in confusion as the threat simply stopped and flew away. There we go, Jake said with satisfaction. Now I can think clearly about the important choice without worrying about my friends getting hurt by what amounts to a timer mechanism. He turned his attention back to the main control panel, but instead of trying to activate the ancient technology, he began studying it like a puzzle to be understood rather than a tool to be used. The thing is, he continued conversationally, I'm starting to think this whole setup is based on a false premise. You keep presenting choices as if they're mutually exclusive, but what if they're not? What if the real test is figuring out how to avoid the choice altogether? Jake worked quietly for several minutes, his usual cheerful humming filling the chamber as he traced connections and tested responses from the alien controls. The architect watched in silence as he treated the most advanced technology in the galaxy like a broken hyperdrive that needed creative repair. Got it, Jake finally announced. The technology isn't actually locked away behind some kind of security system. It's just powered down because no one has ever asked it nicely to turn on. He pressed a sequence of controls that somehow felt right, and the entire chamber came alive with gentle light. Information began flowing through the air in streams of data that were beautiful to watch even if they were impossible to understand. The knowledge is available to anyone who approaches it with genuine curiosity rather than desperate need. Jake explained to the stunned architect. All those other species were so focused on taking the technology that they never tried simply asking for it. The displays around him now showed both outcomes happening simultaneously. His crew was safe outside, and the ancient knowledge was flowing freely, ready to be shared with anyone who wanted to learn from it. But how did you know? The architect asked. How did you solve what was designed to be an impossible choice? Jake sat down on the floor of the chamber, surrounded by streams of beautiful data, and smiled his biggest smile yet. Because I finally figured out what you've been trying to teach me this whole time. You're not testing to see who's strongest or smartest or most logical. You're looking for someone who refuses to accept that good things have to be mutually exclusive. He gestured around the active chamber. Someone built all this because they wanted to share something amazing with the galaxy, but they also wanted to make sure it went to people who would use it to help others, not just to gain power or advantage. So they designed trials that would eliminate anyone who thinks like a conqueror and attract people who think like friends. The architect's voice, when it spoke again, carried what sounded almost like relief. Indeed, you have understood the true purpose of these trials, human Jake Sullivan. But tell me, what will you do with this knowledge? The final chamber revealed itself as Jake walked through an archway made of pure starlight. What he found inside took his breath away, though his smile never wavered. The room was vast, beyond imagination, filled with floating gardens of crystalline trees that sang in harmonious frequencies. At the center stood a figure made of the same shifting light as the data streams, beautiful and ancient and impossibly sad. I am the architect, the figure said, its voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Or rather, I am what remains of the one who built this place. I have been waiting here for a very long time, hoping someone would finally understand. Jake looked around the magnificent chamber with obvious wonder. This is incredible. How long have you been here? 12,000 years, by your calendar. I am the last survivor of the predecessors, the species that once ruled this galaxy before we destroyed ourselves through the same failures that claimed the 11 expeditions. The architect gestured, and the walls came alive with images of a civilization beyond anything Jake had ever imagined. Cities that floated among the stars, beings of pure energy who could reshape matter with thought alone, technology that made the current galactic powers look like children playing with sticks. We had everything, the architect continued. Perfect, logic, unlimited power, the ability to control the fundamental forces of reality. But we lacked the one thing that truly mattered. When we faced challenges that could not be overcome through superiority, we had no other foundation to stand upon. Jake sat down on what looked like a bench made of crystallized music and listened with genuine interest. What kind of challenges? The same ones that face every advanced civilization eventually. Resource limitations that cannot be solved by taking more. Conflicts that cannot be won through greater force. Problems that have no logical solution, only adaptive responses that require hope and creativity. The images showed the slow decline of the predecessor civilization. As their challenges grew more complex, their responses became more rigid. When their technology couldn't solve problems, they built better technology. When their logic failed, they created more perfect logical systems. They defined themselves so completely by their advantages that losing those advantages meant losing their identity. We became so focused on being superior that we forgot how to be adaptive. When faced with truly impossible problems, we chose despair over hope, isolation over cooperation, perfection over progress. Our civilization collapsed not because we lacked power but because we lacked the psychological resilience to survive our own success. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Built these trials to find a species that wouldn't make the same mistakes. Indeed, I hoped to find beings who could maintain hope and joy regardless of circumstances, who could adapt when their initial advantages proved insufficient, who could see cooperation as strength rather than weakness. For 12,000 years, I have tested every species that reached this level of development. The architect's form seemed to grow brighter as it spoke. The Zephyrians were graceful and proud, but they could not function when grounded. The quantum collective possessed perfect logic, but they had no response to illogical problems. Each species excelled in specific areas while remaining vulnerable to challenges that fell outside their expertise. But humans are different somehow. Humans are strange beyond my ability to predict. You have no single overwhelming advantage, yet you possess something that all the others lacked. You can find meaning and joy regardless of external circumstances. You adapt your approach when your initial strategies fail. Most importantly, you do not define yourselves solely by your strengths. Jake grinned and gestured around the beautiful chamber. I have to say, for someone who's been alone for 12,000 years, you've maintained some pretty impressive interior decorating skills. The architect actually seemed to laugh, a sound like silver bells in a gentle breeze. Even now, facing revelations that should humble or terrify you, you respond with humor and appreciation. This is precisely what I hoped to find. So what happens now? Do I get to take home the secrets of faster-than-light travel and universal energy sources? The knowledge has always been freely available to anyone who approached it with the right intentions, but that is not the true gift I offer your species. The chamber around them began to change, showing images of human colonies spread across the galaxy. But these were not the militaristic expansions that other species had attempted. Instead, Jake saw humans working alongside alien species, sharing technology and culture, building something greater than any single civilization could achieve alone. The real treasure is perspective, the architect explained. The understanding that survival requires not dominance, but adaptation, not superiority, but cooperation. The ability to maintain hope and find joy even when facing seemingly impossible challenges. Jake stood up and walked closer to the figure of light. And you think humans can teach this to other species? I think humans can demonstrate it by example. Your species possesses a rare gift, the ability to remain fundamentally optimistic even in the face of failure. This psychological resilience is not weakness disguised as strength. It is genuine strength that appears as weakness to those who measure everything by dominance. The architect gestured again, and Jake could see his crew outside the structure. Alina was taking detailed scans of the crystal formations. Amy was sketching technical diagrams of the alien architecture. Ryan was standing guard but also clearly fascinated by the abandoned alien equipment. Lisa was recording everything for later analysis. Your friends demonstrate the same traits that brought you success in the trials. They remain curious and hopeful. Despite obvious danger, they work together naturally, supporting each other's strengths rather than competing. They approach the unknown with wonder rather than suspicion. Jake felt a warm sensation in his chest as he watched his team. They're good people, better than they know, probably. Indeed. And they represent something precious in this galaxy. The possibility of advancement without the psychological traps that destroy civilizations. Your species may not be the strongest or the smartest, but you may be the most genuinely resilient. The chamber began to glow brighter, and Jake felt himself being gently moved toward the exit. Will I see you again? Perhaps. I will remain here, continuing my watch over the galaxy. But now I have hope that the next species to reach this place might find guidance rather than tragedy. Your success changes the nature of what I offer to others. Jake paused at the threshold of the chamber. You know, for an ancient super being, you're pretty good company. If you ever get lonely, feel free to drop by Earth. We could always use another friend. The architect's laughter followed him as he walked back through the crystal passages toward the entrance. When Jake emerged from the structure, he found his team waiting with expressions of relief and curiosity. Jake, Alina called out, running toward him. Are you alright? The whole structure lit up like a Christmas tree about an hour ago, and we've been picking up incredible energy readings. I'm fine, Jake said, his smile somehow even brighter than usual. Better than fine, actually. I just had the most interesting conversation, and I think I've got some good news about our future in space. Amy held up her scanner, eyes wide with excitement. The technology readings coming from that structure are off the charts. Whatever's in there, it's beyond anything we've ever seen. Even better, Jake said. It's available to anyone who wants to learn from it. No fighting required, no conquering necessary. Just curiosity and a willingness to cooperate. Ryan looked skeptical. What's the catch? There's always a catch with this kind of thing. Jake looked back at the crystal structure, which was now glowing with a gentle, welcoming light. The catch is that you have to be the kind of person who believes good things are possible even when everything looks hopeless. Fortunately, that's something humans are pretty good at. Lisa was already setting up communication equipment to contact the Dawn's Edge. The Council is going to want a full report on this. How do we explain what happened in there? Jake considered this for a moment, then started walking back toward their shuttle. I think we tell them the truth. Sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem is to remember that it doesn't have to be impossible. You just have to be willing to laugh at it first. As the team prepared to leave Zerion Prime, Jake took one last look at the crystal structure that had claimed the lives of 12 different species, but now it stood as a beacon of hope rather than a monument to failure, ready to welcome any species that approached it with genuine curiosity rather than a desire to conquer. The Dawn's Edge lifted off from the dead world carrying not just revolutionary technology, but a new understanding of humanity's role in the galaxy. They were not destined to be the strongest species or the smartest, but they might just be the most important, the ones who refused to let hope die. No matter how dark things got, and in the depths of the crystal structure, an ancient being that had waited 12,000 years for someone to smile at impossible challenges, finally began to hope again for the future of galactic civilization.